Imagine waking up to find the entire Middle East on the edge of explosion. That's exactly what happened in 1967, when Israel, Egypt, Jordan, and Syria were locked in a showdown that could snap any second. Israel launches a surprise airstrike that flips the battlefield in hours, not days, and suddenly one of the fastest, most unpredictable wars in history is underway. Borders shift, alliances crack, and the whole world holds its breath as 6 days reshape decades of tension. This is the Six-Day War, quick, intense, and absolutely game-changing. In the summer of 1967, the Middle East hovered on the edge of a storm that no one could fully predict. Israel watched its borders tighten as hostile speeches, military movements, and diplomatic failures pushed the region toward a dangerous tipping point. Egypt, fueled by rising Arab nationalism and immense political pressure, strengthened its presence in the Sinai, while neighboring states made their own calculations, each believing a decisive moment was approaching. Across the world, major powers observed nervously, aware that even the smallest spark could ignite something far larger. Yet beneath the noise of public declarations and military parades, misunderstandings and fear quietly piled up, creating a powder keg waiting for a single decision to explode. In the coming days, events would accelerate with terrifying speed, unraveling old assumptions and reshaping the region's future. Lives would be changed, borders would be redrawn, and a conflict lasting only 6 days would leave a legacy of consequences still felt decades later. This is the story of how rival ambitions, mistrust, and political miscalculations converged into a lightning-fast war, and how the choices made in those tense hours transformed the Middle East forever. The roots of this conflict reach back almost 2 decades before the first shot was fired. After Israel declared independence in 1948, the surrounding Arab states rejected the new nation and launched an invasion that ended in armistice, not peace. Borders were established but remained disputed, with each side harboring deep resentment and suspicion. For Egypt, the rise of Gamal Abdel Nasser marked a turning point. Charismatic and bold, he championed Arab nationalism and promised to challenge Western influence while uniting the Arab world under a single vision. The 1956 Suez Crisis, in which Israel, Britain, and France struck Egypt after Nasser nationalized the Suez Canal, left a lasting wound and heightened Cairo's sense of vulnerability. Though Egypt emerged politically strengthened, the military humiliation lingered beneath the surface. Across the region, Palestinian Fedayeen groups intensified their raids into Israeli territory, creating cycles of retaliation that hardened attitudes on both sides. Israel viewed these attacks as direct threats to its survival, while Arab states framed them as resistance against occupation and displacement. Meanwhile, the global Cold War cast a long shadow, with the Soviet Union supplying arms and political backing to Egypt, Syria, and other Arab states, while the United States increasingly supported Israel. This external involvement added layers of complexity and amplified regional tensions, turning local disputes into pieces of a larger strategic contest. Throughout the early 1960s, both Israel and its neighbors expanded and modernized their forces. Skirmishes along borders, especially between Israel and Syria, became frequent and deadly. Each confrontation fueled fears of an inevitable larger conflict. Propaganda on all sides escalated, shaping public opinion and pressuring leaders to project strength. Diplomacy, already strained, struggled to keep pace with rapidly shifting realities. By 1966 and early 1967, the atmosphere was thick with distrust. Alliances such as the Egypt-Syria Mutual Defense Pact further heightened Israeli concerns, while Arab leaders felt compelled to demonstrate unity and resolve. Every move, every statement, and every military deployment became part of a dangerous chain reaction. No single action caused the war. Instead, it was years of unresolved grievances, political ambitions, and strategic miscalculations slowly converging. The stage was set for a crisis that would erupt with staggering speed, pulling the region into a transformative and unforgettable 6 days of war. By May 1967, the Middle East had reached a boiling point. Tensions that had simmered for years now threatened to spill into open conflict, and a series of miscalculations and intelligence failures pushed the region closer to war. The Soviet Union, seeking to assert its influence in the Arab world, fed Egypt alarming but false reports that Israel was massing troops on the Syrian border. Nasser, already wary of Israel's growing military capabilities and eager to project strength to the Arab world, interpreted the intelligence as evidence of imminent Israeli aggression. The reports, though inaccurate, created a sense of urgency and fear that would soon drive irreversible decisions. In response, Egypt took a series of bold and provocative steps. Large numbers of troops were deployed into the Sinai Peninsula, strategically blocking key approaches to Israel. Egyptian forces dug in and prepared defensive positions, signaling both readiness and defiance. At the same time, Nasser demanded the removal of the United Nations Emergency Force, which had patrolled the Sinai since the 1956 Suez Crisis. The UN complied, leaving a void that Israel interpreted as a deliberate escalation. The atmosphere grew even more tense when Egypt closed the Straits of Tiran to Israeli shipping, cutting off a vital maritime route to the Red Sea and threatening Israel's access to international trade. This blockade, seen by Israel as an act of war, intensified calls within the Israeli government for a decisive response. While Israel debated the wisdom of preemptive action, Arab states moved to consolidate their positions. Jordan, bound by a mutual defense pact with Egypt, mobilized its forces near the West Bank, while Syria bolstered its defenses along the Golan Heights. Public statements by Arab leaders were increasingly hostile, with declarations that Israel must be confronted militarily. The rhetoric inflamed regional tensions, leaving little room for compromise. Israel's military and political leadership faced immense pressure to act, balancing the need to defend the nation against the risks of triggering a wider conflict. Diplomatic efforts at the international level were swift but largely ineffective. The United States and other world powers called for restraint, emphasizing the importance of dialogue and urging Israel and the Arab states to step back from the brink. However, these warnings arrived too late to change the trajectory of events. Within Israel, military planners prepared detailed contingency strategies for an attack that would strike at the heart of Arab air and ground forces. The debate over timing, scale, and targets consumed political meetings, as leaders weighed the consequences of both action and inaction. Every option carried risks, and the margin for error was razor thin. As May drew to a close, the region's fault lines became starkly visible. Egyptian forces in Sinai were fully mobilized. Jordan and Syria were on high alert, and Israeli intelligence tracked enemy movements with growing urgency. The combination of misinformation, aggressive posturing, and decades of unresolved grievances had created a scenario where war seemed inevitable. Each nation believed it was acting defensively, yet all were caught in a cycle of misperception and reaction. By the final days of May 1967, the world watched as the Middle East teetered on the edge of a conflict that would erupt with extraordinary speed, altering the region's geography, politics, and history forever. Israel's leaders faced an impossible choice in early June 1967. The Arab forces surrounding its borders were numerous, well-equipped, and openly hostile. Yet Israel's survival depended on striking decisively before the enemy could consolidate further. After intense deliberation, the Israeli cabinet approved a daring plan, a preemptive airstrike designed to neutralize Egypt's air force and secure air supremacy. Codenamed Operation Focus, the attack was both meticulously planned and shrouded in secrecy, as success would depend on timing, precision, and the element of surprise. In the days leading up to the strike, Israeli pilots trained relentlessly. Runways, hangars, and aircraft models were studied in painstaking detail, and every possible scenario was simulated. Intelligence units worked around the clock to track Egyptian deployments, calculate flight paths, and ensure that every bomb load would hit its target with maximum effect. Coordination between fighter squadrons, reconnaissance planes, and command centers was flawless, as any error could jeopardize the operation and invite devastating retaliation. Meanwhile, diplomatic channels were kept deliberately calm, leaving Egypt unaware of the precise moment that Israel would act. In the early hours of June 5th, the operation began. Waves of Israeli jets launched pre-dawn from dispersed airfields, flying at low altitude to evade radar detection. Egyptian airbases, many still unprepared for immediate combat, became targets within minutes. Runways were cratered, fuel depots destroyed, and hundreds of aircraft were obliterated on the ground before they could take flight. The scale of destruction stunned both the Egyptian military and the wider Arab world, as the air force that had been considered formidable was suddenly crippled. As word spread, Jordanian and Syrian forces scrambled to respond. Israel immediately extended the attack to include their airfields, ensuring that any potential threat from the north and east would be neutralized before ground operations began. Within hours, Israel had achieved what few had thought possible: complete air dominance. Egyptian and Arab pilots who managed to take off were intercepted or destroyed in dogfights, further consolidating Israeli control of the skies. This air supremacy would prove decisive in the days to come, allowing armored divisions to move unimpeded and infantry to advance, with far less risk from aerial attacks. Operation Focus not only demonstrated Israel's tactical brilliance, but also revealed the importance of speed, coordination, and intelligence in modern warfare. By the end of the first day, the balance of power had shifted dramatically. Arab forces were disoriented, communications disrupted, and morale shattered. Israel, despite being vastly outnumbered on paper, now controlled the air and held the initiative. The effectiveness of the preemptive strike would set the tone for the entire conflict, allowing ground forces to advance rapidly into Sinai, while simultaneously discouraging enemy counterattacks. In a matter of hours, the stage was set for the decisive ground campaigns that would follow, proving that planning, preparation, and audacity could achieve what diplomacy and caution could not. Israeli ground forces moved swiftly into the Sinai Peninsula, following the success of Operation Focus, transforming air dominance into rapid territorial gains. The Egyptian military, already reeling from the destruction of its air force, faced well-coordinated armored assaults that exploited gaps in their defensive lines. At Abu Agila, one of the key fortified positions, Israeli forces encountered fierce resistance. Egyptian troops held well-prepared bunkers and anti-tank positions, and the desert landscape itself complicated maneuvers. Yet Israeli infantry, supported by artillery and precision airstrikes, methodically dismantled each line of defense, showcasing a combination of tactical innovation and relentless determination. The campaign pushed toward Gaza and the Rafah region, where Egyptian units attempted to regroup. Israeli armored brigades employed rapid flanking movements, outmaneuvering slower, less coordinated Egyptian forces. Communications breakdowns and confusion among Egyptian commanders accelerated their retreat, while Israeli units maintained momentum, exploiting every weakness. The speed and decisiveness of the advance left little opportunity for Egypt to mount a counteroffensive. Each village and strategic point captured reinforced Israeli confidence, and the morale gap between the two armies became starkly apparent. Human stories emerged amid the broader maneuvers. Soldiers on both sides faced exhaustion, fear, and the chaos of combat. Israeli forces, aware that success depended on swift action, pressed forward despite the harsh terrain and logistical challenges. Egyptian soldiers, often isolated and without clear orders, struggled to maintain cohesion. The conflict's intensity was amplified by the personal stakes felt by each fighter, turning every engagement into a test of endurance, courage, and survival. Reports of heroic efforts and tragic losses traveled quickly through units, shaping the collective experience of the campaign. As Israeli forces advanced deeper into Sinai, they approached Jebel Libni, a series of ridges and defensive positions that offered Egypt one final opportunity to slow the assault. The terrain favored the defenders, but concentrated artillery, combined arms coordination, and relentless pressure allowed Israeli units to seize the high ground. Each breakthrough brought them closer to the Suez Canal, the ultimate strategic objective. By the time the Sinai campaign reached its conclusion, Egyptian resistance had largely collapsed, leaving Israel in control of vast swaths of territory that had previously seemed impenetrable. The rapid capture of Sinai highlighted not only Israel's military planning, but also the weaknesses in Egyptian command and coordination. Units that had been considered elite disintegrated under sustained pressure, and the psychological shock of defeat contributed as much to Egypt's collapse as tactical errors. The campaign also underscored the importance of combined arms warfare, integrating infantry, armor, artillery, and air support in a synchronized effort that overwhelmed defenders. By the end of the Sinai operations, Israeli forces had achieved a remarkable feat: the seizure of strategic positions, the disruption of enemy cohesion, and the creation of momentum that would carry them into the next phases of the war. The speed and effectiveness of the advance would not only shape the immediate conflict, but also redefined military expectations for the region for decades to come. Jordan's entry into the conflict dramatically widened the scope of the war. Despite warnings from Israel and internal divisions over whether to engage, King Hussein mobilized his forces along the West Bank and around Jerusalem, believing that aligning with Egypt and Syria was necessary to defend Arab honor and territory. Jordanian troops, though prepared for combat, faced the challenge of coordinating with Egypt and Syria while responding to Israel's rapid advances in Sinai. The decision to enter the war would have profound consequences, both militarily and symbolically, as the battle for Jerusalem became a defining moment of the Six-Day War. The fighting in Jerusalem was intense and complex. Israeli forces approached the city with caution, fully aware of its political, religious, and cultural significance. Ammunition Hill became a focal point, where Jordanian paratroopers and defenders held fortified positions overlooking key approaches. Street-to-street and bunker-to-bunker combat unfolded in harsh conditions, with each side suffering casualties. Israeli troops relied on detailed intelligence, close coordination, and superior maneuverability to gain ground, while Jordanian forces fought tenaciously to delay the inevitable. The battle demonstrated both the brutality of urban warfare and the high stakes of controlling the city. As Israeli units advanced, the symbolic importance of East Jerusalem became increasingly apparent. The Old City, home to sacred religious sites, was a psychological as well as a strategic objective. Israeli commanders balanced military necessity with the recognition that their actions would be scrutinized worldwide. Soldiers navigated narrow alleyways, stone barricades, and sniper fire, advancing carefully but relentlessly. Jordanian defenders, though outmatched in coordination and resources, mounted fierce resistance, and every block taken required planning, patience, and courage. By the time Israeli forces reached key positions near the Old City, the city's fate was increasingly determined by momentum, training, and morale. Beyond Jerusalem, the broader West Bank campaign unfolded rapidly. Israeli units crossed into strategic towns and high ground, neutralizing Jordanian defenses and securing critical communication routes. The speed of the advance prevented Jordanian forces from regrouping effectively, and repeated breakthroughs created a cascading effect that left units isolated and disoriented. Israeli troops, building on lessons from Sinai, employed coordinated infantry and armor tactics to seize control of urban and rural areas alike. Each victory reinforced their confidence while eroding Jordanian will to fight, demonstrating the interplay between strategy, timing, and psychological impact in modern warfare. The capture of East Jerusalem marked a turning point in the campaign. Soldiers raised the Israeli flag over key sites, signaling not only a military triumph but also a dramatic shift in the city's governance. While the broader conflict continued on other fronts, the psychological and symbolic implications of controlling Jerusalem reverberated throughout the region. The West Bank's strategic positions captured alongside the city provided Israel with a buffer against further attacks and reshaped the regional balance of power. By the conclusion of the Jordanian front, Israeli forces had achieved decisive victories, securing critical territory while forcing Arab armies to reconsider their strategy. The swift and effective operations in Jerusalem and the West Bank underscored Israel's ability to convert preparation, intelligence, and momentum into tangible success, further defining the outcome of the Six-Day War. The northern front against Syria presented a different set of challenges for Israel. Syrian forces had positioned themselves on the Golan Heights, a series of rugged, elevated ridges overlooking Israeli settlements in the Hula Valley. From these heights, Syrian artillery regularly shelled civilian areas, creating constant fear and disruption. Unlike the Sinai and West Bank, the terrain in the north was mountainous and heavily fortified, favoring the defenders. Israeli military planners recognized that seizing the Golan Heights would be difficult, risky, and costly, but necessary to prevent ongoing attacks and secure Israel's northern border. In early June, Israel's leadership debated whether to open a northern front. With resources already committed in Sinai and the West Bank, some argued for caution, while others stressed that leaving the Golan Heights in enemy hands would leave northern communities exposed. Ultimately, the decision was made to strike. Units were carefully organized for rapid ascent, combining infantry, armor, and artillery with air support. Reconnaissance teams mapped out Syrian positions, supply routes, and defensive bunkers, ensuring that Israeli forces would have a clear operational picture despite the challenging terrain. The assault began with coordinated artillery barrages designed to weaken Syrian fortifications. Israeli infantry advanced under fire, navigating steep slopes, rocky outcrops, and well-prepared enemy positions. Tanks, though less effective on the mountainous slopes than in the desert, provided crucial support where terrain allowed. Syrian forces resisted fiercely, using bunkers and observation posts to slow the advance. Each ridge taken required careful planning, teamwork, and determination. Casualties mounted on both sides, and the intensity of the fighting underscored the difficulty of attacking a well-entrenched opponent in such unforgiving terrain. Over 2 days, Israeli forces systematically captured key positions on the Golan Heights. Coordination between ground troops and air support proved decisive, allowing Israeli units to neutralize artillery emplacements and supply lines while maintaining momentum. Syrian defenders, despite their strong positions and high morale, were unable to sustain prolonged resistance against the combination of precise attacks, superior coordination, and the psychological impact of rapid territorial losses. By the end of the operation, the Golan Heights were under Israeli control, securing the northern border and ending artillery attacks on civilian areas below. The capture of the Golan Heights was both a tactical and strategic victory. Militarily, Israel eliminated a constant threat to its northern settlements and created a defensible line against future attacks. Strategically, the operation demonstrated the effectiveness of combined arms tactics in difficult terrain and highlighted the importance of planning, intelligence, and timing. Politically, the success further strengthened Israel's position in subsequent ceasefire negotiations, while Syria faced the humiliation of rapid territorial loss. The Northern Front reinforced the pattern seen in other theaters of the Six-Day War. Swift, decisive operations that leveraged planning, surprise, and coordination to overcome numerical or positional disadvantages. By the conclusion of hostilities on the Golan Heights, Israel had achieved control of a critical region, securing both strategic depth and a lasting psychological advantage over its adversaries in the north. The rapid success of Israel's military campaigns sent shockwaves across the international community. Governments and leaders watched with a mix of concern, admiration, and alarm as the tiny nation achieved feats that seemed impossible just days earlier. The United States and the Soviet Union, both deeply invested in Middle Eastern geopolitics, reacted cautiously, weighing the strategic and political consequences of the unfolding conflict. Washington and Moscow urged restraint, emphasizing the importance of a ceasefire, but their words struggled to keep pace with the swift and relentless progress of the Israeli armed forces. Diplomatic channels became increasingly active as the realities on the ground evolved. United Nations representatives sought to negotiate a halt to hostilities, sending envoys and issuing statements calling for immediate ceasefire and adherence to international law. World media covered the war intensely, broadcasting images of rapid Israeli advances and territorial gains while highlighting the human cost of the fighting. International opinion was divided. Some praised Israel for its decisive action in the face of existential threats, while others criticized what they perceived as disproportionate use of force against its neighbors. The attention of global powers underscored the strategic significance of the conflict and the urgency of achieving a political resolution. Within the region, Arab leaders faced the aftermath of unexpected and severe defeats. Egypt, Syria, and Jordan had mobilized large armies and prepared for a protracted struggle, only to find themselves outmaneuvered and overwhelmed. Politically, the war weakened the credibility of leaders like Gamal Abdel Nasser and King Hussein, as their populations struggled to reconcile promises of resistance with the reality of rapid territorial loss. Diplomatic efforts intensified behind the scenes, as Arab states sought international support to halt Israeli advances and negotiate terms that could mitigate the humiliation of defeat. The war's swift conclusion forced regional powers to reconsider both military and political strategies in the face of Israel's demonstrated capabilities. The United Nations Security Council began drafting resolutions aimed at restoring stability. These early diplomatic efforts would eventually form the foundation for Resolution 242, calling for withdrawal from occupied territories and recognition of all states' sovereignty. While negotiations were ongoing, Israel consolidated its control over newly captured regions, establishing military and administrative authority while addressing the immediate humanitarian needs of civilian populations affected by the fighting. The juxtaposition of rapid military success and the necessity of diplomatic engagement highlighted the dual realities of modern conflict. Force could achieve quick results, but long-term stability required negotiation, compromise, and international legitimacy. The international response to the Six-Day War revealed the complexity of global involvement in regional conflicts. Superpowers, international organizations, and neighboring states were all forced to navigate a rapidly shifting landscape, balancing strategic interests with humanitarian concerns. The war demonstrated that decisive military operations could dramatically alter political dynamics, compelling even distant nations to respond to the consequences of local actions. As ceasefire negotiations progressed and the dust of battle settled, the world began to grasp that the Six-Day War had not only redrawn borders, but also reshaped the diplomatic and strategic contours of the Middle East, setting the stage for decades of negotiation, tension, and ongoing debate about the region's future. The conclusion of the Six-Day War left the Middle East fundamentally transformed. In just 6 days, Israel had captured the Sinai Peninsula, the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the Golan Heights, creating a dramatic shift in territorial control that reshaped both strategic and political realities. The Arab states, once confident in their numerical superiority and defensive preparations, faced the shock of rapid defeat, prompting immediate reassessment of military capabilities, leadership, and alliances. The war's brevity masked the depth of its consequences, as every nation involved now confronted the long-term implications of territorial loss, displaced populations, and altered regional dynamics. The humanitarian impact was profound. Tens of thousands of civilians were displaced across the newly occupied territories, including Palestinians from the West Bank and Gaza, and Egyptians from Sinai. Families fled combat zones, leaving homes, businesses, and livelihoods behind. Refugee flows added to already existing pressures in neighboring countries, exacerbating political and social tensions. The images of destruction, despair, and displacement circulated widely, shaping public perception of the war both within the region and internationally. These human consequences underscored the cost of rapid, high-intensity conflict, reminding all parties that military victory was inseparable from human suffering. Militarily, the war demonstrated the effectiveness of rapid mobilization, intelligence, and combined arms operations. Israel's ability to achieve air supremacy, coordinate ground maneuvers across multiple fronts, and exploit the weaknesses of entrenched enemy forces redefined expectations of modern warfare. Conversely, the Arab armies were forced to confront the limitations of their coordination, planning, and communication. These lessons would influence military doctrines, procurement strategies, and training programs for years to come, as both Israel and its neighbors sought to prepare for the inevitability of future confrontations. Politically, the aftermath of the Six-Day War reshaped the balance of power in the region. Israel's territorial gains provided strategic depth and security buffers, but also introduced new governance challenges in occupied areas. Egypt, Jordan, and Syria faced domestic and international pressures to recover politically and militarily, while Arab nationalism suffered a significant psychological blow. The war fueled the rise of Palestinian nationalism and the Palestine Liberation Organization, as displaced populations and political leaders sought new avenues for resistance and representation. The conflict's consequences rippled far beyond the battlefield, influencing diplomatic efforts, alliances, and regional negotiations for decades. The war also catalyzed international engagement. United Nations resolutions, particularly Resolution 242, aimed to establish a framework for peace, calling for Israeli withdrawal from occupied territories and recognition of all states' sovereignty. Superpowers and regional actors became more directly involved in shaping the post-war order, balancing security interests with diplomatic and humanitarian considerations. While Israel emerged militarily triumphant, the political and strategic environment remained complex and contested. The legacy of the Six-Day War extended beyond maps and borders. It left enduring questions about security, justice, and coexistence, laying the groundwork for continued negotiations, tensions, and conflicts in the Middle East for generations to come. The Six-Day War ended almost as suddenly as it began, yet its effects reverberated throughout the Middle East for decades. In less than a week, Israel had transformed its strategic position, capturing vast swaths of territory and demonstrating a level of military efficiency that stunned both allies and adversaries. The Sinai Peninsula, the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the Golan Heights all came under Israeli control, redrawing maps and redefining borders that had been contested since Israel's founding. These rapid gains not only altered military calculations, but also reshaped political realities, forcing neighboring states to confront the consequences of misjudgment, miscommunication, and overconfidence. The psychological impact of the war was profound. Israel, a small nation surrounded by hostile neighbors, emerged with a sense of invincibility, its forces proving that careful planning, intelligence, and decisive action could overcome numerical superiority. For the Arab states, the shock was equally severe. Egypt, Syria, and Jordan had mobilized large armies expecting to assert power, only to be outmaneuvered and overwhelmed. Leaders faced domestic criticism and diminished credibility, and the loss of territory, combined with the humiliation of rapid defeat, sparked both political and social unrest. The Arab world was forced to reckon not only with the military consequences, but also with the symbolic blow to pan-Arab nationalism and confidence in their leadership. The war's human consequences were equally stark. Tens of thousands of civilians were displaced, forced to leave homes and communities under the threat of advancing armies. Refugee crises intensified long-standing demographic and political challenges, particularly in the West Bank, Gaza, and Sinai. Families separated, livelihoods destroyed, and entire communities uprooted, leaving scars that would influence generations. Beyond the physical destruction, the psychological toll of fear, loss, and uncertainty contributed to enduring grievances, fueling narratives of injustice and resistance that would shape subsequent conflicts and political movements in the region. Strategically, the Six-Day War demonstrated the critical role of planning, coordination, and timing in modern warfare. Israel's use of a preemptive airstrike, combined with swift armored and infantry advances, highlighted the effectiveness of integrated operations and intelligence-driven decisions. The Arab armies, despite their size, suffered from fragmented command structures, poor coordination, and delayed responses. The lessons of the war were studied intensively by military planners worldwide, influencing doctrines and preparations for future conflicts. The conflict underscored that technological advantage, tactical innovation, and psychological momentum often outweighed numerical superiority, particularly in fast-moving operations. Politically and diplomatically, the conflict reshaped the landscape of negotiations and international engagement. United Nations Security Council Resolution 242 called for the withdrawal of Israeli forces from occupied territories and emphasized the recognition of all states' sovereignty, establishing a framework that would guide peace efforts for decades. Superpowers such as the United States and the Soviet Union were compelled to engage more directly, balancing strategic interests, regional stability, and global perceptions. Israel's new territorial reality created both opportunities and challenges, as the state now faced the dual task of securing borders and managing occupied populations, all under the watchful eye of the international community. Ultimately, the Six-Day War was not only a military event, but also a pivotal moment in modern Middle Eastern history. It demonstrated the speed with which conflict can alter politics, geography, and social dynamics, leaving legacies that endure long after the final shots are fired. Israel emerged stronger and more confident, while Arab states confronted the consequences of miscalculation and strategic misjudgment. The conflict reshaped alliances, spurred political movements, and influenced the course of diplomacy in the region. The war's outcomes continue to affect negotiations, security concerns, and perceptions of justice and legitimacy, illustrating that even brief conflicts can have enduring consequences. Understanding the Six-Day War is essential to understanding the complexities of the Middle East, where history, geography, and politics remain intertwined, and where the echoes of those 6 extraordinary days still shape the pursuit of peace, security, and coexistence across the region.